with our daughter and brand new son-in-law, and we had a great time. Frank got to do a bit of fishing and caught some fish, which we had as a meal, so I'm feeling very happy for the time away. Rosie got to do a bit of shopping. I said, look, if I can go fishing, you can go shopping, and I didn't even put a limit on the credit card, so it shows that I must have some love for her, hey? Thanks, Jeff, for mentioning about the prayer. One other prayer meeting that sort of happens every fortnight is with a study group that meets here on a Wednesday. They meet at 1 o'clock. I've had a chat to the people who run that, and we've decided that we will add our prayer, that we this month of prayer, and so that'll be this Wednesday here at the church. They normally meet fortnightly, but we're actually going to fill in the middle one so that we'll be doing 3 Wednesdays in a row. The study group will still be there, but we're going to focus on prayer as well. So if you've got time between 1 and 2, or a little bit longer usually on the Wednesday, we have a cup of tea and a bit of a chat as well. That will be here at the church on those next 3 Wednesdays of February. I've got a title on my message this morning called The Gathering God and You. And I'm going to preach on that this Sunday, and next week I'm going to do a little bit more in terms of that theme. Early last week, I was driving down here to the church, and I had the radio on in the background. I don't know what your car's like. My car, when you turn the ignition, well, you don't turn, you push a button for the ignition, but when you push that button, it automatically turns on the radio, and I don't know how to automatically not have it do that, so I've got to always turn it off. I don't want to listen. And it opened up with an advert, and it was a UE advert. Do you know what UE is? It's the insurance company. And I bothered to listen. I don't tend to listen to adverts. I tend to just somehow turn off. But in the advert, a voice said, "At UE, we know that you don't want to talk to AI. You want to talk to a person." That made me sit up and listen. And they went on to say that as an organisation, they have got over 2,000 on staff to make sure that every phone call you make is answered by a person, so that you get some sort of person-to-person recognition. And I guess if I can put it that way, isn't that what the voice of the church should be as well? Shouldn't a church be a place where we actually talk to each other, where we meet person to person, where we're not just a clump of people who turn up for something called the church service, but we're actually a part of a family? And these days, families don't always work like that. I remember a sad reflection a few years ago with my own family. We were living in a 2-storey house. Our kids were in their early 20s. I'd been upstairs to get something, and when I came down, 3 children and 2 others were sitting in the lounge area, and they all had their phones out, and they're all pushing buttons. And I felt quite sad in that moment to think, well, talk to each other. I've been on a bus at one stage where there's been a couple of people sitting side by side, and after a while I worked out they weren't talking to each other. Even though they were sitting side by side, they were sending texts. So it seems to me that's something we really need to think a lot about, which is this sense of relationship and connection with others. You know, we did a church survey recently, and a couple of the big things that came out of that survey was one, that we should be a church that prays, to really want to hear the heart of God. If we believe God is a personal God, then prayer is talking to him. And also, not just talking, but what did we do a bit of, Jeff, in that meeting? We did some listening, trying to hear the voice of God so that we can understand what he's trying to say to us as a church. The other thing, it was that there was this strong sense of we should be connecting with our local community. And the best way for that to happen, surely, is through personal connection and personal communication. So how do we go about doing that? Well, I guess there's got to be this sense of who do we notice and who notices us? Now, I've got a slide I've asked Lisa to put up. Now, can anybody have any guess at what that thing is? Hey? Food. No, it's not food. I'd be really surprised if anybody gets it. You can see that it says it was in the rocks below Blanche Point. Do you know where Blanche Point is? So if you go down to Maslins Beach and you head south from there, there's a point that sticks out with a little rock on the end called Gold Rock, and that's Blanche Point. And many, many years ago, as a teenager, it was January 1968, does it say it? It does. I was just ready as a 16-year-old to start year 12 in high school, and I was walking along the beach, and at the end of that there's a whole lot of rocks. The cliff has sort of tumbled down, and these rocks are from that cliff. And as I stepped over a rock, I saw that in a rock. Now you would say, why would you stop for that? Because when I saw that, I didn't see a rock, and I didn't see something that was pitted. You can see it's pitted. I actually knew that it was something else. I just saw it for a brief second, and it caused me to stop and to look and to say, there's more to that than meets the eye. And so I covered it with rocks. I was so excited by what I'd found, even though it had been there for hundreds of years probably on that beach, and it had the wind and the waves cutting into that rock and causing some damage. But I knew there was something else underneath, so I covered it. I went home, I got a hammer and a chisel, and I chiseled out that part of that big rock. I couldn't carry it all home, so I got a big enough piece of it that I knew that thing inside was safe, and I chiseled it out, and this is what it showed. And you can see where the circle in white is. That's the bit that I could see. And you can see, now what is it? It's a tooth. That is a fossilised shark's tooth. And just from that little circle, I knew that other thing was underneath it. And I knew that because I had the eyes to be able to see something instead of just seeing a dirty old rock, a washed out, weathered rock. I knew there was something else there. And I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. That we live in a world where there's a lot of rocky, craggy people around who are probably showing all the damage of life, where the weather of life, of hard circumstances, has probably left them a bit pocked and marked. And it might be that we would just pass them by every day and not really see them. But I tell you, there is someone who has the eye to see what's deeper inside, and who can see, in spite of that stuff, there is something of beauty in every person. And I think that's one of the big calls for us as a church. And so as I've been thinking this through, we in recent months have looked at, in December, the Advent, the coming of the King, the Messiah, showing up as the person of Jesus. And in the month of January, we then looked at, well, who was Jesus and what did he do? And we looked at the stories of him moving amongst people. And as the story today reminded us, meeting with people that others might say, well, why would you want to have time for them? But he did. And his heart touched them, and his heart brought change. And so moving from January into February, Gaynor introduced this last Sunday, we're then saying, but hang on, so Jesus came, and he was the Messiah that had been promised hundreds of years before. And he lived for a period of 30-odd years, and you could see God at work in his life. We know that the Spirit of God flooded down on him when he was in the Jordan, baptised by John. And the Spirit of God gave him the capacity to do the things of God, and gave him the eyes to see into the lives of people, to know that there's more to the eye in most people than what you see from the outside. But he died, he was raised back to life, and eventually he was taken into glory. And it says that though there was a group of disciples with him at that moment, they watched him taken up out of their presence. And as that happened, and as he finally disappeared from sight, there were two angels present who basically said, "Men, what are you gawking at? This Jesus that you've seen go, he will come again and he will take you into heaven. But in the meantime, there's work to be done." And do you know what those guys did after that meeting? They went back and they prayed. And this is the passage that Gaynor shared last Sunday. And they were told to wait. "Wait," Jesus said, "for the promise from my Father, which I've spoken to you about. That in not many days that God will send the Holy Spirit upon you in the same way that he sent him upon me. And you will do my work, and you will be my witnesses, and you will share this message." And so that's Acts chapter 1 and chapter 2. This morning I want to turn into Acts chapter 3 to give us one story of what this looks like. So in Acts chapter 3, reading from verse 1, it said, "One day Peter and John were going up to the temple at the time of prayer, at 3 p.m. Now a man who was lame from birth was being carried to the temple gate, called Beautiful, where he was put every day to beg, and from those going into the temple courts. And when he saw Peter and John about to enter, he asked them for money. Peter looked straight at him, as did John. And then Peter said, 'Look at us.' So the man gave them his attention, expecting to get something from them. And then Peter said, 'Silver or gold I do not have, but what I do have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, walk.' And taking him by the right hand, he helped him up, and instantly the man's feet and ankles became strong. He jumped to his feet and began to walk. And then he went with them into the temple courts, walking and jumping and praising God. And when all the people saw him walking and praising God, they recognized him as the same man who used to sit begging at the temple gate called Beautiful. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at what had happened to him." So there's a few things in the story that we need to look at. The first thing is this. Here's a man with a disability. The scripture here says he was lame from birth. It's interesting because actually the word says he was lame from the womb. So it wasn't just a disability that may have happened in the process of birth, but it was there probably from the time of his conception. In other words, it sounds like something totally permanent, not even something that could have been avoided. It was there. And I guess this disability had framed his life, and it had framed the thinking of those who knew him. And so we're told that everybody just knew him as the person with the disability, and every day he was brought and placed at the temple gate, and people walked by. I wonder how many times Peter and John had walked by. I wonder how many times they had seen him sitting there and saw him as the person with a disability. I wonder how many times they were like others who'd been on the beach and stepped over the rock, never realising that they were looking at something that was quite incredible and beautiful, because on the surface it just looked damaged. And it's easy for any one of us to be like that in life, to have people around us who look uncomfortable, or they don't look the whole deal. Or there's stuff in their world that go, well, I wouldn't have a clue what to do with that. But for some reason, in this situation, the Lord told them to stop and look on this one. And remember, this is just one story. And this doesn't have to be the example, but it gives us an insight that there are people who have things happening in their lives. And the truth is, every one of us in some ways is that lame man. You might not be lame in your feet, but what other sorts of lameness can there be? Physical things that hinder you. Lameness is one of them. Poor eyesight, trouble with hearing, lack of coordination, no musical ability, can't play sport, no good at art. Physiological things, diabetes, blood disorders, some form of cancer or tumour, thyroid malfunction, bowel disorder, disease in your private parts, urinary tract issues, and there's loads more that we could raise. And then personal issues, shy and introverted, depressed, lack optimism, withdrawn and struggled to make friends. People say you're on the spectrum, mental health issues, chemical addictions, you just don't feel good enough, lack of self-worth, difficulties with learning or reading or writing. See, there's more than one kind of disability, isn't there? And most of us have got something inside of us that we say, I wish that was different. But I wanted you to know that the disability doesn't hide from God who you are. It doesn't stop him from seeing the things of your life that are actually beautiful. So he's got eyes to see, despite those things, who you really are. He can see that whole fossil tooth when others just see a piece of rock. The second part of this, and we should take heart from that God sees us and knows us, but he also sees those around us as well. The second thing in this story, it says in the NIV that as they went up to the temple, there was a man who was lame from birth. It says that, a man from birth. But interestingly, in older versions, like the King James Version, they actually have another word in there. And it says there was a certain man. There's a little three-letter word in Greek, T-I-S, tis. And that changes it because it's not just a man, it is, and in this context, that little word means a certain man. What does the word certain mean? Well, it's identifying him. It's focused on him. It's not just the crowd anymore. There's somebody in the crowd here. Have you ever been in a meeting? There's someone here today. Whereas, in fact, this story says there's a certain person. And while we've not given the person's name, we know this is the person under focus. This is the person who's in question. You see, the truth is a crowd isn't just a mob of people. In a crowd, every face has a person behind it. And every face has a person who has a story. And in those stories, there are disabilities of some kind. Things where life doesn't work out, where there's been hardship or disappointment or hurt. And there's no perfect person who can stand there and say, well, that's not me. I don't have. Because the truth is, if we're honest, we do have. I've put my hand up a few times in those lists because I'm no different and you're no different. And so in that sense, we need first in this story to see we are that person and that God sees us as that certain person. And so God's saying to you, I've got my eye on you. You didn't slip by. This isn't just a crowd. Every person's a person, and you are that certain person. And God cares about you, and He cares about your life, and He cares about what happens, and He cares about the things that have been difficult for you. So Jesus has those eyes to see. I've got 2 pages stuck together here. Jesus knows that we all have problems. He knows we all have disabilities of some kind. He knows we have something we struggle with. But the Father sent Him to each one of us with hope that He sees us and He wants to do something about it. The third thing to note, I think, in this story is that what Jesus sees Himself, He can reveal to others. And this is where we shift in the story. We are those who have been seen, and we are those who've received His help. Now we become those who carry that hope. And the fact that He has promised to give His Spirit to us means that we now can see with the eyes that Jesus sees with. So that we, in a sense, become Peter and John. We become those who can see a crowd, but in it see that certain person that God gives us the eyes to see. And it may be when we first meet them, we don't see anything, but there's a person. But we engage somehow in connection and in conversation, and then we start to see. And so we then have this message in our hearts because as those who have been seen and been touched, we know that God can do that for them as well. We are the ones who see the certain person. The fourth thing in the story is that Peter and John had empty hands. Interesting, isn't it? I wonder if you were in that situation whether you would look and go, well, there's nothing I can do here. I don't have anything in my hands to be able to help. So they didn't look at these hands. They looked at this heart and said, while I don't have anything in my hands, there's something in my heart that has been given to me that I can give to you. And so, no, we may not always be able to give the thing that is being asked for, but we can always give the one who we know is the answer. So Jesus moved about and saw certain people in the crowd. He saw Zacchaeus, who was a little short man who couldn't see past the crowd, climbed into a tree, and Jesus saw him in the tree. Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house. There was a woman in the crowd who snuck up to touch the hem of his garment. And he knew something had happened. And he saw her, that certain woman, who was embarrassed and probably feeling somewhat distraught because of the physical condition that she had. But he saw her because she was that certain person. And so when we come to these certain people, there is this opportunity, if we stay long enough and we engage long enough, to hear the story and to know that Jesus has an answer for them. And surely that's the secret of the future of South Point. We can think, well, we haven't got that, or we don't have this, or we can't do that. But you know what we have? Isn't this the place where Jesus is present? Isn't he the one that we worship and love? Hasn't he done and made changes in us that he can make for others? So we don't need to look at all the things we haven't got, because we have the most important one. And he has come to us and dwells with us by his Spirit to enable us to do these things. And so that's really my final point, is that it's the change that's happened to us becomes the key to the change that can happen in others. And so when we read this story, instead of writing the names Peter and John at the beginning of Acts chapter 3, we get to write our name in there. Molly went, Frank went, Trish went. Write your name in. I could name you all, and I mean to. Instead of writing the temple gate at Jerusalem, we can write our own front gate, the place where we live, or the front gate of South Point. And instead of writing a certain man who was lame from the womb, we write a certain person we encounter who's looking for help, someone who's struggling with their own particular disability or sickness or life issue. Just this week I was talking to Pauline. She bumped into somebody. She got into conversation, little evangelist, and did exactly what this story is about, and said, we have a group, why don't you come? So we get an opportunity to stop and to talk. We don't have to have cash in our hand because we have Jesus in our heart. And it's these people that God will gather together to be his family. Just as he's gathered us, he will extend his family. And they become the recipients of his grace. Jesus said that his Father makes the rain to pour on the good and the bad, on the righteous and the unrighteous. So his grace extends to all. Do you remember the UE advert that I talked at the very beginning? People don't want to talk to AI. They want to talk to a person. And so TV shows or tracks or whatever, they may be useful. But the best thing of all is another person who uses their voice to speak into their heart. Shall we pray?